You know, Madam Speaker, living in Canada is like winning the lottery. We have a history of standing for justice. We're a country dedicated to the rule of law. We're prosperous, we're safe, and we've been blessed with an embarrassing abundance of natural resources. Our citizens are among the best educated in the world, and we boast a strong democratic system and a commitment to peaceful transitions of power. Now, since 2006, I've had the honor of serving the constituents of Abbotsford, British Columbia, who have elected and re-elected me 6 times through a robust, fair, and transparent electoral process. This very process is what Bill C-65 claims to improve upon. Madam Speaker, trust in our democratic institutions, in our elections, is critical to a peaceful and vibrant society. And Canadians must have confidence that the members of this House, right here, this chamber, have been elected and arrived here fairly and without interference from foreign powers. As such, there are some provisions in this bill which we Conservatives would agree with. But we are also deeply concerned that the provisions of this bill are an attempt to conceal from Canadians a much more cynical ploy, namely the promotion of the private financial interests of the Prime Minister's NDP Liberal caucus, a group of MPs who expect not to be re-elected again. And I'll get to that in a moment. But to be sure, there are provisions in this legislation that we support. For beginners, there are provisions that make changes to third-party donations, and those changes are welcome, particularly as they are aimed at preventing foreign entities from contributing to election-related activities in Canada. With the recent revelations regarding interference in our democracy by hostile foreign actors, and the shocking disclosure that our Prime Minister failed to act in a timely manner to warn Canadian MPs and party candidates of threats to their own elections, we parliamentarians must act to ensure that our institutions remain secure and accountable to the only people that really matter, Madam Speaker, and that is Canadians themselves, not to hostile foreign powers. Ensuring that foreigners can't easily donate to candidates for federal election is a sensible, albeit very modest, improvement to a stronger democracy. So if that was the sole purpose of Bill C-65, we'd be content. But this modest improvement in our election laws is marred by other elements which are problematical. And I speak, of course, of the Prime Minister's cynical efforts to extend the so-called fixed election date by 1 week. A fixed election is exactly that, or it's supposed to be that, which is the setting of a fixed date for an election to take place in a predictable manner instead of the Prime Minister gaming the system for his own partisan purposes. Sadly, the fixed election that the law prescribes is no more. Instead, the Prime Minister has cynically pushed it back. He's pushed back the fixed date to benefit his NDP Liberal MPs who are facing imminent defeat in the next federal election.
Hear, hear.
According to this piece of legislation, Canadians are going to have to pay more to pay for the pensions of MPs. Accordingly, this piece of legislation is now becoming known as the Loser NDP Liberal Pension Protection Act. That's what it is. Let me repeat that. The Loser NDP Liberal Pension Protection Act.
Exactly what it is.
So let me explain. For those Canadians who have just tuned in, they deserve to know that in order for an MP to qualify for a parliamentary pension, They must have served a total of 6 years in this House of Commons. It just so happens that there are 80 MPs who were elected in 2019 who will not qualify for a pension if they lose the next election. They would fall 1 day short. And the Prime Minister, of course, sensing that he and many of his NDP and Liberal coalition MPs won't survive politically, has cynically included in this legislation before us a provision that, get this, would extend the fixed election date by 1 week to secure the pension entitlements of NDP Liberal MPs.
Painful.
Now, the Prime Minister claims this extension to the fixed election date has nothing at all to do with vesting pensions in his MPs and everything to do with the Indian festival of Diwali. That's a fair point, except that he had the option of actually moving the date 1 or 2 weeks earlier to avoid a conflict with Diwali, or calling an election right now, as we have asked him to do. This would spare Diwali and avoid some of the corrosive cynicism that Canadians are experiencing today. But no, the Prime Minister has again exploited our long-suffering taxpayers by favoring the financial interests of elected officials who work here and, quite frankly, are well compensated for the work they do in this House. Remember, this is the Liberal government that has amassed more debt than all other Canadian governments in Canadian history combined. Combined, Mr. Speaker. This is the Prime Minister who so glibly proclaimed that budgets balance themselves. This is the Prime Minister who asked Canadians to forgive him for not thinking about monetary policy. So what's a few more taxpayer dollars going to pension off well-to-do and well-paid politicians? On that basis alone, Mr. Speaker, we Conservatives will vote against this legislation. We will always promote the interests of Canadian taxpayers. And by the way, Mr. Speaker, it is true that 32 of my Conservative colleagues are within that group of 80 MPs. But those Conservative MPs have made it very clear that they're prepared to go into an election right now and put our Conservative vision and plan for this country to the Canadian people, as up against the disastrous Liberal record.
Disastrous.